Hi FGBers. For starters, let's go ahead and say happy 2020. We're coming at you live from the Fairygodboss headquarters in New York here today for the feed. And I am Liv, I'm the Associate Editor here, and I'm being joined today by Sue.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me, Liv.
So happy to have you, Sue. So yeah, as you all know, the feed is really our space where we get to elevate some of the conversations happening among women in the Fairygodboss community and talk about the ways that they have gotten us thinking. So without further ado, shall we see what conversations we have for today?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, okay, to start us off with, we have a question posted by Savannah Finch. Savannah says that she's looking for job search inspo in 2020. What are the most unusual or conventional ways that you've found a job? She says they say that something like 75% of jobs today are found through a personal connection, which is kind of wild. Your network obviously counts for a lot, but besides relying on connections or cold applying to job openings online, I'm wondering who here has found job hunting success through unconventional means. So, has that happened for you?
Actually, very interestingly, I found this job at Fairygodboss in an unconventional way. I was actually on my parental leave and wasn't sure if I was going to be going back to work or not, but I wanted to take some more time at home with my daughter and had coffee with a friend. She asked me what my dream job was. I gave her some broad ideas on what I'd like to do on a day-to-day basis and the type of organization I'd like to work at, and she told me, I think I know a place that you should apply to. So I applied, kind of not knowing what was going to happen, and when I met my boss today, I decided in that moment, like, I have to get this job and I have to start working. I have to go back to work early. So absolutely. How about you?
Yeah, for me, I think that I had just moved to New York and I needed money. And a friend set me up with, it was like a one-time event staffing gig. The event, which I didn't really know much about going into it, turned out to be a fundraising gala for an organization called Commit to Change, which works with, at the time it was 7 all-girl orphanages in India supporting their education. I got to talking to the founder, and we just went from there. It wound up becoming a fellowship position for me. So yeah, you never know. I feel like opportunity in New York especially feels like it's kind of just around every corner. But let's see what corners other FGBers found opportunity around. This one I thought was so interesting. So one FGBer posted in response, I actually found a job through a dating app. I met someone for a first date. Clearly the romantic chemistry wasn't there for either of us, but we wound up talking quite a bit about our careers, and it turned out that his best friend worked for what I consider to be a dream company. He put us in touch, a successful first date, if an unconventional one, and then I guess that led to a job for her. But I think that's so funny. We were talking about this earlier. I don't think, do you know anybody who's made a job connection through a dating app?
So interestingly, I have not met anybody who's made a job connection through a dating app, but I have known people who've made connections through just going on dates or on blind dates. So I guess the non-modern day era version of the dating app.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a way of building your network. And I think that especially within, I've noticed in queer circles in the city, that tends to be a way that sometimes job opportunities and career connections are found. So I think that's really interesting to see someone else reflect that.
I also really liked this comment that someone posted about being contacted for a position through their Instagram. It was a lifestyle account that they had made for people in her industry, and it really made her unpaid hours pay off. I thought that was so interesting, and she talks about how important it is to build an online brand, which in today's world makes a lot of sense to me.
Totally. I think we talk at Fairygodboss about passive job hunting is a conversation we've been having recently. And I think that one way to passive job hunt is to build an online brand that speaks for itself and that induces employers to come to you with opportunities. And I think that one space in which you could do that is on Fairygodboss. You can build out your profile and use it to connect with other people in your industry, or if you're looking to change careers. We have a lot of people on the site having those conversations and making those connections as well. So yeah, build your brand, do it online, do it on Fairygodboss. Let's see, let's maybe read out one more of these.
This one is great about, one person has posted that they actually found a role at a yoga retreat. So I think that's really cool, and it kind of speaks to what you were saying about connecting with people who have like-minded interests, and building your network in every possible way can really help you find that job.
Yeah, absolutely. Wait, last one really quick, because this is funny. Somebody found their job while they were stuck in an Uber pool with the person who wound up being their employer. I guess that's funny.
Hilarious.
You never know where the next opportunity will find you. Okay, let's go with the next conversation.
So someone posted on Fairygodboss, do you ever text your boss? And they wrote, my friends and I had an interesting debate about if it's ever okay to text your boss, except in the case of a true emergency. I think it's so tacky to communicate in such a personal way. Email or IM almost always suffices. What do you think? Liv, what are your thoughts?
So tacky, gauntlet thrown, am I right? I think that for me personally, I've been really fortunate to have managers who I was close with and felt an interpersonal connection with, but at the time that they were actively managing me, I've always made a point of like keeping those boundaries mostly intact between text, which feels like a very personal way of communicating, and your more standard like Slack or email business communication. Because I think that having those boundaries in place is important. Things can get messy otherwise. And I think the inverse of this too is that, do you want your boss texting you? And for me personally, that answer is generally speaking no. Like, you want to have both the interpersonal boundaries in place and the separation of work and life.
Right.
Let's not text about work,
Yeah.
like during the weekend. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. When I first read that, I hadn't thought about what it means to establish that relationship where your manager can then text you directly as well. So I completely agree. It's nice to be able to schedule work and the time that you want to do it, and schedule your personal life and the time you want to have that. And texting your boss can sometimes cross those lines. So for me personally, I don't think that I would text my boss in a professional capacity unless it was an emergency. Should we see what other FGB is that?
Yeah, let's do it. This post really took off. It was like a slightly contentious topic, I suppose. But it seems like largely a lot of people are saying that it really depends on the specific relationship that you have with that specific manager. Like Lisa here says, it depends on the boss. I text my boss all the time, and my people text me. I would just ask them, the boss, what their preference is. I think it's a much less invasive way to communicate off hours than a phone call, which is kind of funny because, like, phone calls,
Yeah.
calls each other anymore. I don't know, millennial over here. But yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's efficient. It's an efficient exchange of communication. If you do have to get in touch with somebody off hours, that would be preferable to a phone call.
Yeah.
Let's see what other. Oh, this one was kind of cute.
Yeah, I loved this one. That one of the Fairygodbossers posted that she texts her boss when she's heading to Starbucks on her way to work. And I thought that was so nice. I guess she and her boss both really love Starbucks, and she wants to be helpful and pick up a coffee, and that's actually really sweet.
Yeah, that is sweet.
And I think that might make it okay to cross that line of personal and professional.
Yes, if somebody's bringing me treats, I don't care who they are, they can text me all day long. And yeah, I mean, as much as we are talking about having those interpersonal boundaries in place between personal and professional, at the same time, like, we are all still human. That's a nice way of just like acknowledging your boss's humanity, I guess.
Yeah.
I do want a coffee.
Yeah, and I think it also brings up the idea of we have different personas, right? We have our professional persona and we have our personal lives, but we can have personal relationships with our professional coworkers. So in that example, to me, that feels more like a personal relationship than it does a professional one via text message. So it's kind of nice that you can have those personal relationships even with your coworkers and your bosses.
And balance both, and just there's a time and a space maybe
Exactly.
for each of those with the same person. That makes sense. There was one that I was seeing earlier. Okay, Jessica, said, this is such an interesting question, one I've never thought of. Since starting my professional career, I've always texted my bosses and didn't think much about it. My bosses also text me and rely on that more than they do email, which I think is really interesting, a sign of the changing times and changing workplace cultures. Maybe if texting does become more of a norm, this will feel more of just an automatic assumed, like, we text each other, but at this juncture that we're at now, it's still kind of like blurry territory, I think.
Yeah, I'd be so interested in asking Jessica what other forms of communication they use at work in addition to email and texting, because I do also think we use Slack at Fairygodboss, and Slack notifications come up on your phone if somebody reaches out to you directly. So in a way, it's almost like bridging that gap between email and text anyway.
That's really true. Yeah, Jessica, if you're watching this, would love to hear your response to that. And also, I believe that we have a poll going in the video comments about this question. Should you text your boss? So feel free to weigh in there as well. Okay,
Great.
shall we? On to the next?
Let's do it.
Okay. Our third and final conversation for today's episode comes from an FGBer who is struggling with a friendship that she's had for 20 years. She says, I've known these two women since I was in the 3rd grade. We have over 20 years of friendship together. One does her best to keep in touch, the other, not so much. 2 years ago, I moved to a different state and they completely changed. They stopped calling and stopped texting, but I've noticed they watch my social media stories. She says that she's since had some other big life changes, that she found out she was pregnant, tried to get back in touch with these two women, and is really left wondering, she says, does a true 20-year friendship really fade? What say you to that, Sue?
I think it's a really interesting question. I know I personally have had this conversation with a lot of friends about what does it mean to be a friend, and when should you hold on to friendships and when should you let them go. I had one really interesting conversation where a friend of mine told me that people come into your life to teach you something or to learn something from you. And sometimes those teachings and learnings take 20 years, and sometimes they take 2 weeks. So if you think about it from the perspective of, take what you get and what you give, it's a little bit less, I think, jarring to think about the end of a friendship.
Totally. I like that a lot as well. I think that we have a tendency in this culture, or maybe more widely, to automatically assume that an ending is a failure. And to your point, I don't think that that's true at all. I think that there are people who come into your life for a reason, and there's also a reason at times to where you don't fit within each other's like spaces or needs quite so neatly anymore, but that doesn't mean that you don't love them anymore or that it overwrites what you did share and what lessons you did impart with each other. So yeah, I like how your friend put that. Let's see what some other folks had to say here. Gina says, in short, yes. does a true 20-year friendship fade? It can. Long-term friendships can change or fade as the friends move into different phases of their lives. I've been there, done that myself with women I've known for nearly 40 years. It happens all the time. Social media has made it a little easier to keep in touch, but in-person meetings can be a little tough. I think in terms of like love languages, which also apply to friendships too, I think that especially if you're somebody who really values in-person quality time, moving can become a really big hurdle to continuing a long-term friendship. One thing that I like to do, and I have some other friends who do this as well, with friends of mine who no longer live in the same state as me, if you set a date and act like it's still like you would be going to dinner with them if they lived in the same city as you, and just like have dinner over Skype and really treat it like a special, like carved out time that you've set aside for them, and that you plan on like a date, I think that makes it like easier to feel more connected to those people. It takes time, it takes effort, but like so does maintaining a close friendship over that amount of time.
Yeah, I think that's such a smart suggestion, Liv. I love that idea. I'm going to try it myself. No, I do. I really do. And I think that what happens a lot when you're communicating with somebody not in person, sometimes even in person, you end up being distracted by other things. Your phone buzzes and you're like, oh, I have to check this immediately, right? But when you carve out that time and make it special, you're really focused on that person and that relationship. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Totally. And just the gesture of, so for this woman, I would say that taking that step of making that gesture and saying that this is something that I want to do to reconnect with you, people want to feel like you want to connect with them. Yeah. So that can often go a long way in itself, just like making that first move. Okay, I know we're going to be running tight on time here soon, but let's see what a couple other folks have said. Abria says, I'm so sorry to hear that you're growing apart from these friends. I recently had a bit of a best friend breakup myself. We grew apart and live in different states. You never know, you may grow close again in the future. Maybe in 5 years, they'll be in a more similar phase of life with you again. And I think that that's a really good point. It's easy to think that if you've grown apart with somebody right now, that's it, it's done. But we have our whole lives ahead of us, and you never know when like paths can recross and when it makes sense to be closer with someone again.
For sure. And Abra, I love this language that you used of a best friend breakup, because oftentimes we think about relationships and friendships differently. But in a lot of ways, our friendships are just as meaningful or sometimes more meaningful than the relationships we have. So it is a true breakup when it ends.
Yeah. So it makes sense to take a little time to like mourn that if you need to. But I like the hopeful note that she ends on here too, which is that like, you never know. Okay, I think we're right at about time. But if anybody wants to continue in on this conversation with us, all of the posts to the conversations that we've been talking about, all those links you can find in the video comments. So let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, in the meantime, we're going to be back with the next episode of the feed on January 21st. So happy that you joined us for this one, Sue. And in the meantime, yeah, just keep the conversation going on fairygodboss.com.
Thank you.